The call came as I sat in my car outside my daughter's elementary school in Cedar Falls, Iowa, the engine off, the windows cracked to let in the evening breeze. Parents walked in and out of the building with paper programs under their arms. The sun was hanging low, bathing the parking lot in a soft golden light, and I remember thinking how peaceful and ordinary everything felt. When my phone rang, I glanced at the screen and almost let it go to voicemail, not wanting to disturb the peace. A man introduced himself as Dr. Randall Pierce of North Valley Medical Center in Des Moines. His voice was smooth and professional, shaped by long hours and difficult conversations. He told me that my sister Lila had suffered complications during a routine gallbladder surgery. Then he said the words that made my world collapse. He said she wouldn't live. I told him to repeat himself. This time, he spoke more slowly, more carefully, as if spacing the words might make them lighter. Lila was 32 years old. She ran 5 miles every morning before work. She had texted me jokes about hospital gowns the night before her surgery, teasing me for worrying too much. Nothing about that call was the sister I knew, and nothing about it made sense. The drive to Des Moines felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. The highway stretched straight and endless, cornfields on both sides blurring into dark green bands as the sky slowly dimmed. My mind kept replaying the last voicemail Lila had left me, her voice light and teasing. She laughed and promised to call after surgery just to complain about the food. Every few miles, I glanced at my phone, half expecting it to ring again. I waited for a different voice, for an apology, for someone to tell me there had been a terrible mistake. The phone stayed silent. I drove with both hands locked around the steering wheel, my shoulders tight, my jaw clenched, my body bracing for something I could not yet name. When I finally reached North Valley Medical Center, night had settled over the city. The hospital rose out of the darkness like a fortress of glass and steel, its windows glowing against the black sky. As I pulled into the parking structure, the building felt less like a place of healing and more like a wall I was about to walk into, unprepared and alone. Inside the hospital, the air was heavy with the sharp smell of disinfectant layered over stale, burned coffee. The lobby lights were too bright, reflecting off polished floors that felt cold and impersonal. A woman at the front desk asked for my name, typed it into her computer, and nodded without ever looking up at me. Moments later, she stood and walked away, leaving me alone with the low hum of machines and distant overhead announcements. I was guided into a small consultation room with beige walls and no windows. A single box of tissues sat in the center of the table, unopened, as if placed there ahead of time. The chair scraped softly against the floor when I sat down, the sound far too loud in the quiet space. Dr. Pierce entered carrying a clipboard, followed by another doctor whose name I did not catch. Neither of them sat right away. They spoke in careful, measured phrases about unexpected reactions and rare complications, their voices calm and controlled. It felt like they had delivered this explanation many times before. None of the words reached me. They floated in the air and fell flat. Finally, Dr. Pierce set the clipboard down and slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. Consent forms. Release forms. Documents that reduce my sister's life to signatures and initials. Forms acknowledging death. My hands stayed in my lap. I looked up and told them I wanted to see my sister. The room went still. The doctors exchanged a glance, and the pause that followed lasted a second too long to be accidental. A nurse in light blue scrubs led me down a narrow hallway toward the morgue, her footsteps quick and uneven. Her name tag read Maria Alvarez, and I noticed the way her hands trembled as she held the clipboard against her chest. The corridor was quiet except for the distant hum of ventilation and a soft squeak of our shoes against the polished floor. Just before we reached the double doors, Maria slowed. She leaned closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine, and lowered her voice so much I almost missed the words. "She's not dead," she whispered. I stopped walking. My heart slammed against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure someone else could hear it. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Maria's eyes flicked upward to the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Fear flashed across her face. "They're watching," she said quickly. "You have to listen to me. Your sister is alive." Before I could respond, she straightened her posture, smoothed her expression, and pushed open the double doors as if nothing had been said, leaving me standing there with my breath caught in my throat and the world suddenly changed. The morgue was colder than the rest of the hospital, the air biting against my skin as soon as the door opened. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow across stainless steel surfaces. A man in a white coat stood beside a gurney draped with a thin white sheet, his expression unreadable, his posture rigid. Without ceremony, he reached forward and pulled the sheet back. It was not Lila. The face staring up at the ceiling was unfamiliar, the skin waxy and pale, the features wrong in every possible way. My stomach lurched, and the room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the edge of the gurney to steady myself, my fingers numb against the cold metal. "This isn't my sister," I said, my voice barely steady. The man frowned and lowered his gaze to the clipboard in his hands, flipping a page as if the answer might appear there. "This is the correct patient," he said, his tone flat, rehearsed. "No," I said, louder now, the words sharp in the sterile air. "My sister has a scar on her chin from when we were kids. She has freckles across her shoulders every summer. This is not her." The man stopped moving. The buzzing lights seemed suddenly louder. No one spoke. The silence settled heavily in the room, thick with something unspoken and wrong. Back in the waiting area, I stopped trying to be polite. My voice echoed sharper than I intended as I demanded answers, drawing glances from other families hunched in their chairs. A different administrator appeared, a woman in a tailored blazer with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She apologized smoothly, her tone calm and controlled, and suggested there had been a simple charting error. When I asked to see Lila's medical file, the smile faltered. Her fingers tightened around the folder she was holding, and something guarded crossed her face. "There is no record of a patient by that name admitted yesterday," she said. The words landed wrong, like a sentence spoken in the wrong language. I let out a short, sharp laugh that startled even me. "I spoke to her surgeon," I said. "I was called here. I stood in your morgue. How can she not exist?" The administrator did not answer. Instead, she took a small step back. Two security guards shifted closer, their presence suddenly noticeable, their eyes fixed on me. In that moment, it became clear I was no longer a grieving sister in their eyes. I was a problem. I spent the night in a cheap hotel across the street from the hospital, the kind with thin walls and flickering hallway lights. I lay on the stiff mattress staring at the stained ceiling, listening to traffic pass outside and the muted sound of an ice machine down the hall. Sleep never came. Every instinct in my body told me something was deeply wrong. Lila had not simply vanished. People do not disappear without leaving a trace. By morning, I had made a decision. I returned to the hospital and played the role they seemed to want from me. I apologized for causing trouble. I thanked them for their time. I asked calm, reasonable questions and nodded as if their answers made sense. All the while, I watched. Staff members avoided eye contact. Conversations cut off when I stepped too close. Doors closed more quickly than before. A security guard appeared at the end of each hallway I entered, never stopping me, never leaving. He followed at a careful distance, close enough to be seen, far enough to send a message. I understood then that I was being monitored. And whatever they were hiding, they were afraid I might flee. I found Maria tucked inside a narrow supply closet near the surgical wing, surrounded by shelves stacked with gloves, gauze, and sealed trays. The door was pulled nearly shut, leaving only a thin strip of fluorescent light cutting across the floor. Her shoulders were slumped, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, as if she had not slept in days. She did not look at me right away. When she finally did, her voice dropped to a whisper. "They moved her," she said, "after something went wrong. But it was not the surgery. It was something else." My pulse thudded in my ears. "What do you mean?" I asked. Maria shook her head, pressing her lips together, as if afraid the words might escape on their own. They're testing things, she said quietly. Treatments they cannot get approved. Patients without families are the easiest to control. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway before returning to mine. Your sister asked too many questions. The air felt suddenly thin. My stomach dropped as the pieces began to fit together, forming a picture I did not want to see, but could no longer ignore. I slipped into the administration office while most of the staff were gathered in a meeting down the hall. The room smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee, the lights dimmed to save energy. I moved carefully, keeping my steps quiet, remembering how Lila used to joke that blending in was a skill you learned growing up in a small town. She had always known how to disappear when she needed to. At one computer, I pulled up the security archive. The footage from the night of her surgery jumped from early evening to dawn, entire hours missing as if they had never existed. My chest tightened. I opened patient charts next. Signatures were inconsistent, written by hands that did not match. Medication logs listed drugs that did not align with her procedure or condition. As the pattern emerged, a cold understanding settled in. This was not a single error or careless oversight. It was organized, intentional. This was not a mistake. It was a system. That afternoon, 2 security guards walked me toward the exit, their hands open and polite but firm. Their footsteps echoed beside mine through the long corridor, drawing curious looks from nurses and visitors who quickly looked away. At the front doors, a man in a dark suit was waiting. He introduced himself as legal counsel for the hospital, his tone smooth and restrained. He warned me that continued interference could result in legal consequences: trespassing, harassment, obstruction. The words were delivered calmly, like facts, not threats, which made them feel heavier. Outside, the cold air hit my face as the doors slid shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the glass, barely recognizing myself. Then I walked to my car and sat inside with the doors locked, my hands shaking so badly I had to rest them in my lap. The hospital loomed across the street, massive and untouchable, and I felt painfully small in comparison. For the first time since the phone call, fear crept in. Real fear. I thought about my daughter waiting for me at home, about her bedtime routines and the sound of her laugh. I imagined walking away, driving north, pretending none of this was mine to fight. Leaving felt safer. It felt responsible. My phone rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet car. I flinched and stared at the screen, my heart pounding, knowing before I answered that whatever came next would change everything again. Maria's text had come just after midnight. A single line with an address I barely recognized and a warning: outpatient research wing, closed after dark. Be careful. My pulse quickened as I read it, part fear, part hope. Every instinct screamed caution, but the possibility of seeing Lila alive drove me forward. I returned to the hospital under the cover of darkness, slipping through a side entrance Maria had identified. The automatic doors creaked faintly as I pushed them open, and the silence inside was immediate, oppressive. Hallway lights were dimmed to almost nothing, casting long shadows along the polished floors. I could hear the soft hum of machines behind locked doors, rhythmic beeps and whirs that sounded like quiet breathing in the dark. I moved slowly, listening to every echo of my footsteps. Each door I passed felt heavier, more guarded, more secretive. My hands trembled as I reached the final corridor. Then I heard it, a laugh, faint, fragile, but unmistakable. Lila. My heart skipped. I froze, straining to hear it again. There it was, a second time, soft and weak, but full of life. Lila, I whispered, my voice barely audible, choked with relief and disbelief. The sound of her laugh answered me again, closer now, like a thread connecting us through the shadows. I had found her. She was alive. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweeter, almost metallic. Lila lay in a hospital bed, pale but unmistakably alive. Tubes ran from her arms, monitors beeped softly, and the sheets were tucked neatly around her frail frame. The moment her eyes met mine, tears welled up, and I felt a lump in my throat, my chest tightening as relief and anger collided. "They said I signed consent," she whispered, her voice hoarse and brittle. "I did not." Her words hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. She told me, in fragmented bursts, about the experimental treatments forced upon her, the subtle but relentless pressure from staff, and the fear she had tried to mask with quiet compliance. She spoke of people avoiding her questions, of doors closing just a little too quickly, of the hidden tests she never agreed to but was trapped into. I sat beside her bed, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I recorded everything, her voice, her story, the details that proved what they had done. Every word was a lifeline, a record of the truth she had been denied. For the first time in days, I could feel the weight beginning to lift. She was alive. And soon, the world would know it too. By the time I returned with evidence, the hospital felt different, tense, guarded, almost brittle. Maria had stayed close, her eyes alert, constantly scanning every hallway and doorway. I carried a small recorder, my phone, and copies of the altered charts I had photographed earlier. Every step toward the administration wing made my pulse hammer harder against my ribs. When I entered the main office, 2 administrators looked up, surprise flashing briefly across their faces before their expressions hardened into practiced neutrality. Security guards moved to flank the doors. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice steady, loud enough to echo through the sterile space. "I have recordings," I said, placing the phone on the table so it could be heard. "I have photos. I have copies of altered records. I've shared them with a journalist in Chicago. And I know the truth about what you've done to my sister." For the first time, the air shifted. The administrator's smiles faltered. One of them glanced nervously at the other, fingers fidgeting with papers that suddenly seemed meaningless. Maria's presence at my side, though trembling, added weight to my words. "You've hidden her. You've lied. You've experimented on patients without consent," I continued. "And I will not let you do it to anyone else." The security guards stiffened. Phones were lifted. I could see the first signs of fear on the administrators' faces, a crack in their composed facades. They were used to controlling everything, but they were not used to being exposed. I watched the color drain from their expressions, watched their eyes dart toward doors and phones. I did not falter. This confrontation was not about threats. It was about truth. And for the first time, I held the upper hand. They knew the consequences of hiding it now. And for the first time, I believed my sister would finally be safe. Within days, the walls of North Valley Medical Center began to crumble, not physically, but in the way the truth erodes control. Investigators arrived from federal agencies, their badges glinting under the hospital's harsh fluorescent lights. Lawyers shuffled through hallways, stopping staff to ask questions, their voices firm but polite. News vans lined the street outside, cameras trained on the glass and steel building that had once seemed untouchable. Inside, the hospital staff moved like shadows, whispers filling the hallways where silence had once ruled. Administrators who had seemed untouchable now avoided eye contact, their footsteps quick and uncertain. Security guards no longer followed me. Their presence had shifted from intimidation to caution. Lila was moved to a safe facility where she could begin the slow work of healing. Her recovery was fragile at first, arms still marked by tubes, skin pale, and her laughter hesitant, but it was real. She was alive, whole enough to feel hope again. As the truth became public, the hospital issued statements, executives resigned, and policies were questioned, challenged, and rewritten. What had been hidden in the shadows was now exposed in the daylight. I sat beside Lila in her new room, holding her hand and watching the sunlight spill across the walls. We didn't speak much. Words weren't needed. There was a quiet strength in that moment, a sense of justice settling in alongside relief. For the first time since that phone call in Cedar Falls, I felt the weight of fear lift. We had fought the system and survived. And more than that, we had reclaimed something that had almost been stolen from us, the right to be seen, heard, and safe. The hospital's walls no longer held power over us. The truth did. And it felt like freedom. Months later, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my kitchen in Cedar Falls, painting the room in soft gold. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air, ordinary and comforting in a way that felt miraculous after everything we'd been through. Lila stood by the counter, moving slowly but with a careful strength, her once pale arms now free of tubes and bruises. She laughed softly as she poured herself a cup of tea, and for the first time in months, it felt like she truly belonged here, with me, in this home. I watched her, the weight of fear and uncertainty finally lifting from my shoulders. We had survived the impossible. Every quiet glance, every small gesture between us was now a reminder of resilience. The hospital, the secrecy, the lies, they no longer held power over us. Love and truth had won. We sat together at the table, talking in low voices, laughing at small jokes that had nothing to do with the past but everything to do with life continuing. My daughter joined us, her energy bright and relentless, and Lila smiled at her, really smiled, the warmth radiating from her like sunlight. In that ordinary kitchen, surrounded by the smells and sounds of home, I realized something profound. Bravery is not always loud. Sometimes it's simply showing up, refusing to let fear make your choices for you, and protecting the ones you love no matter the odds. I reached out and held Lila's hand. She squeezed mine back, a silent promise. We were alive, we were together. And the world, no matter how dark it had seemed, had finally returned to light. This was more than survival. This was home. This was hope.